Disclaimer, this is a video of me reacting to someone else's Five Nights at Freddy's theory. I don't always agree with them, but that has nothing to do with how I feel about them as a person or even their channel as a whole. I have and will continue to make it clear that I am a fan of this creator, and this video is simply me providing my own opinions on their theory. This video is not trying to say that I know better or am better than this creator, it's simply me seeking out other people's opinions so that I can explain the things that I agree with, the things I don't, and so I can understand these alternate opinions whether I agree or not. Anything negative I say or any negative reaction I have towards the theory is just me disagreeing, and I will always explain my point of view. Whether you agree with my stance or the creators, please just be civil towards both of us in the comments. Thank you and enjoy the video. Hey, what's up guys, ImpulseEvan here, and today I am bringing us another video, and in this video I'm going to be reacting to the newest FNAF game theory, FNAF the Circus of Horrors. Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually the first game theory that Tom has done. Well, the first one that he's been the host of since MatPat left. So, I'm actually excited to see this because it's not, it's new. Yeah, this hasn't happened before, except in like YouTube Shorts and stuff. The last one of which was a little funny and kind of concerning, but it's okay. I should say before we start this video that I don't know what he's going to say, but I've heard a little bit of talk that there's some like parallel talk in it, like about I'm assuming Tales from the Pizzaplex, maybe Fazbear Frights. I should just say that I believe that Tales from the Pizzaplex and some Fazbear Frights are in the games. You guys probably know this by now, but if there's some new people watching that that haven't watched me before, then you might not know. So I just want to let you guys know ahead of time, just in case he says something to do with that I disagree with, just so you guys understand why I disagree without me having to go over it over and over again. I might mention it a few more times that I do, and I might like go into a little bit more detail depending on what he says. This video is pretty long though, so I should probably get started. We have 28 minutes of video to watch. That'll probably end up making this video like 45 minutes long. So let's get started. First thing that's on the screen is Fredbear's Family Diner. So let's just see where this goes.
Fredbear's Family Diner.
Hello, Tom.
This is where it all began. The animatronic empire, the string of deaths, and William's descent into madness. Everything.
String of deaths started at
this one location,
mostly
or at least
Freddy's,
that's what we all thought until today.
Except Charlotte, theoretically.
Hello Internet, welcome to Game Theory, where
Hello.
It is finally time. Today, I graduate from FNAF boy to FNAF man, and take on my very first FNAF theory.
Yay.
Although, I say that, I have actually been helping Matt write FNAF theories for the past 3 years.
Yep.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
Have
Matt.
a safe flight back.
Bye.
I didn't get to talk to you about Gregory as a robot. It's all right.
Kids.
I mean, to be fair, that was both of our sin, but you know.
I threw something out, my first FNAF theory, I threw something out
Yeah, Gregory's a robot, first FNAF theory, and look how well received it's been.
there. Look how good that
Yay.
was for all of us.
It's done so well for all of us.
Yeah, what
very
could
well
possibly
received.
go wrong? But don't worry, theorists. I promise today's theory is way less crazy, hopefully. Because today,
Hopefully.
I'm going to be tackling one simple, teeny tiny detail that I think is really important to understanding this franchise. Help Wanted 2 was full of collectibles, most of which you get from a prize machine after you beat a minigame. Some are set prizes that relate to the level you just completed, like a sun figure for beating the first daycare mission, or a meat pretzel for beating the Fazbear Theater. However, after you beat the game, there are some extra prizes to collect that are given to you at random when you replay a stage. Usually this is just extra plushies, models, or food. But sometimes you get posters, and one of these posters stood out above all the rest. It ends up on the back wall right next to the Faz Wrench entrance for the Princess Quest minigame. It's a poster promoting Fall Fest 1970.
Alright, before he goes on, I should just give my quick thoughts on this. I made 2 videos on this topic of the Fall Fest and the circus or carnival, whatever it would have been. It looks like a circus tent, but there's also like a lot of carnival and circus connections. They're not the same thing, but they can be like very related, so there's that whole thing. And I made 2 videos going over that topic, which you guys can check out if you want to. I might put them in like the end screen for this video or something if I remember to. But I think that the Fall Fest is probably what started the story of the series. I feel like it could also have to do with Fredbear's Singing Show, depending on how old that was. It is black and white, and it's really cheap, but that doesn't have to mean it's like in the 30s, like MatPat suggested in his timeline from last year. It could have been a little bit more recent than that, maybe like 60s or even 70s. That's not completely out of the question. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Regardless, even if it's not the Fredbear Singing Show, it makes sense to me that Fall Fest 1970 would be the beginning, especially due to the Tales from the Pizzaplex books, where Edwin is turning costumes of characters into the animatronics, indicating that before anything else, there were just costumes. Not animatronics, not even Springlock suits, just costumes that people would wear. And it makes a lot of sense because those costumes are heavily like circus or carnival themed, like with like the jester thing and the like the carnival or circus like characters, like the lion and stuff like that. On top, and the elephant and stuff like that. And there's also the fact that in another Tales from the Pizzaplex story, Pressure, it's mentioned that the Springlock suits were shut down not long after they were introduced. Yet there's the thing in Ruin that says that's like the Freddy's 70s like cardboard cutout, the thing that you get the Brazil ending from, which indicates that Freddy's or Fazbear Entertainment or whatever originated in the 70s, and that connects to the Fredbear's Family Diner posters from the beginning, or from Security Breach, that show just costumes and not Springlock suits, which indicates that Fredbear started with costumes and then the Springlock suits were added later on in its lifespan, which indicates that I think the carnival started everything and then Fredbear's opened also with the costumes, and then the Springlock suits were introduced after that, and then the carnival or Fall Fest 1970 whatever, it shut down possibly because of fire, since the carnival themed like levels often burn down, like Fazer Blast and the Carousel. So yeah, I've been talking for a little while. Those are just my basic thoughts on it. And yeah, like I said, I made 2 different videos on the topic, so you guys can check it out if you want to. Let's continue though.
Now, to the FNAF community, Fall Fest is nothing new. We
Yes,
first
from Curse
saw
of
this name
Dreadbear.
pop up almost 5 years ago in the Curse of Dreadbear DLC for the original Help Wanted. A Halloween-inspired event full of attractions, rides, and of course, spooky versions of all our favourite characters to fit in with the Halloween theme. But there is one crucial difference between this Fall Fest and the one we see on the poster.
One is 83 and one is 70.
Date. The banners around the Curse of Dreadbear hub world show that this event was taking place in 1983, but this new poster is from over a decade before. This whole Fall Fest thing has clearly been running for a very long time. In fact, it's been running since before the earliest confirmed parts of the FNAF timeline. In the Silver Eyes, when Charlie is looking for news articles on Fredbear's Family Diner, she starts the search at 1979, seeming to imply that this was when the diner was founded. But that is 9 whole years
Yeah,
after
probably
this
around
poster
there.
was published. And that's not all. Look at the design of this poster. While it's advertising Fall Fest, it's not inherently spooky like the event we see for the Curse of Dreadbear. Instead, it has autumnal elements, but it's mostly designed to look like an old 2-tone circus poster, complete with a giant circus tent right in the middle. And this isn't the first time Steel Will has offered us hints that circuses might be important to this franchise. There's the mini games in Help Wanted 2, like the carousel.
There's a
Basil
lot of
Blast. There's
things.
the circus costumes that are
Like
down
I said,
in
I
the
talked
basement
about that in my
of Ruin. There's even
videos
circus-themed
on it.
Funko merch. Clearly, Steel Will is beating us over the head with this circus thing for a reason. But why? Well, back in 2022, in the build-up to Security Breach's Xbox port, Steel Will did an interview with Game Jolt to talk about how they made Security Breach, give some updates on Ruin's development, and drop some little hints towards what might be coming down
and
the pipe.
I believe what they said was that they wanted to make a game based on the earlier parts of the timeline and like the beginning of Fazbear Entertainment, and they said that they wanted it to go back into like the 70s, which makes sense with all this stuff and how it's alluding to the 70s being important.
Pipeline for them and the FNAF franchise. And when asked what kind of game they'd like to make in the future, they said this.
One thing that I've always would love to do is get back to kind of like the origin of like Fazbear Entertainment, kind of see how things were made.
Same here. I'd like to head further back into the 70s.
They want to create a game about the origins of Freddy's set in the 70s. Most of us at the time assumed this would just be Fredbear's Family Diner, but with all this circus imagery popping up, it begs the question, what if Fredbear's Family Diner wasn't the origin of Freddy's? What if instead it was this circus? Fall Fest 1970. And once I realized that, things started to fall into place. This poster is the key to clarifying some massive holes in the FNAF timeline. It confirms a number of things we've been predicting for a while, and it shines a little more light on the franchise's latest villain. Come to think of it, maybe this isn't such a small theory after all. Whoops. So, you better
30-minute long theory. Yeah, it's so small.
grab your popcorn, theorists, because the show is about to begin, and I'm going to reveal to you the true origins of Freddy's. Now, I understand there may be some hesitancy in me changing up the entire beginning of the timeline. I get it. It's a pretty big claim. And while there have been a number of hints towards circuses throughout the games and books, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where this whole thing started. So, let's take a look at one of the more recent examples of the circus being hinted at, so I can show you where I'm coming from. In the basement of the Ruin DLC where you find the Mimic, there
costumes?
are 2 costumes hanging up. An old lady blackbird and an elephant dressed as a clown. In the game files, there's also a lion wearing a varsity jacket. 3 animals all associated with the circus. Elephants often perform tricks, lions were regularly tamed by lion tamers, and while crows or blackbirds aren't traditionally circus animals, they do often appear in circus-focused media like Disney's Dumbo. Plus, the elephant is literally dressed as a clown. It doesn't get more circusy than that. But the most important part isn't actually their circus theming. It's the fact they aren't animatronic suits. In our initial theory on Ruin, we talked about how these costumes seem to be related to circus babies because, you know, circus. However, when Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals, or even Circus Babies Pizza World was due to launch, they were all animatronics, and complex ones at that. Why then would they have physical costumes? They wouldn't, unless these costumes actually came from something circus-themed that was before animatronics were part of this franchise.
That's what I was kind of talking about a little earlier, and it also connects to another theory that I also made a while ago. It was called Fredbear's Family Diner Solved, or something along those lines. That was, to this day, that's actually probably my favorite FNAF theory that I came up with, because like, there's so much that it actually solves, and so much that actually adds up. Like, it explains why Edwin was turning costumes into animatronics, rather than just building animatronics in the books. And it also explains the pressure comment about how the Springlocks were created not long before they were decommissioned, which indicates that if Fredbear's was opened like pre-1982 or whatever, that's kind of a while for the Springlocks to exist if it's not long after they were created that they were shut down. And they would have been shut down probably around 1985, considering they were still active during the first Freddy's location, and they were shut down shortly before the missing children incident. So pre-1982, I'd say, and even 1982 is a little bit of a stretch. If they were created in like 1983, even then, that's still quite a while. So they can't have been created too long before that. So if Fredbear's opened with the Springlocks, that doesn't make that much sense. So if the costumes existed before that and were for the carnival, that makes a lot of sense. And then if they were also used for Fredbear's, that also makes a lot of sense if FNAF 6 is Fredbear's, because that would explain why the costumes are in the FNAF 6 location, because they were originally at Fredbear's. And there's also the fact that, like I said, the costumes were turned into the animatronics, meaning the versions of the costumes that were used to create these animatronics, like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Golden Freddy, all those animatronics, they were maybe not Golden Freddy, possibly Golden Freddy, questionable, but the costumes that were used to create these animatronics would have also existed in the 70s, and that would explain Funguy's comment from FNAF 1, where he says that the animatronics haven't been cleaned in 20 years. Sure, that could have just been an exaggeration, but this offers a really good explanation for that doesn't just rely on it being just slightly off. You know what I mean? So that's why I really, really like that theory, and I'm really proud of it. Go check that out if you haven't already. There's a little bit more stuff that I'm not talking about right now that you can go check out that video and learn about. So,
and the Mimic, not the robot.
What is he talking about?
Wouldn't, unless these costumes actually came from something circus-themed that was before animatronics were part of this franchise.
Yes.
In the Mimic, not the robot, the Tales from the Pizzaplex story named after him, we learn of a character named Edwin who owns a robotics company, getting big off of making a robot vacuum cleaner. However, with the birth of his son, the death of his wife, and then the crippling pressure of running his own business, he decides to sell the company to none other than Fazbear Entertainment.
Slight correction here. His wife dies in childbirth with his son, and then he sells his company to take care of his son. And then his son dies.
Why does Fazbear
Just small
agree to
correction.
purchase? Because they want Edwin for his robotics knowledge. Specifically, they want him to turn their character costumes into full-blown animatronics.
Yes.
We've seen him do exactly this with Chica in the first few pages of the story. Later on, he goes on to explain that this is the 18th character he'd been asked to create, describing the collection as, quote, a circus-like array of animal and other character costumes. Circus-like, you say? We believed for a long time that Edwin is the book's parallel for Henry, the animatronic genius that helped Afton to grow
We? Just kidding.
Fazbear is the animatronic empire we know today. So the circus-themed costumes we see in the basement of Ruin likely came from that same time period, a period where Henry was transforming costumes into animatronics.
Or
And
just
these
Edwin.
costumes aren't Henry's only connection to the circus either. When Charlie goes back to her childhood home in the Silver Eyes,
Yes. I know what he's about to say. There's the whole thing where Henry had like books on the traveling circus and the carnival or something along those
through
lines.
Henry's office and finds an assortment of books that, quote, would have seemed eclectic to anyone who didn't know the man. There were books on biology and anatomy, some on human beings, others on animals. There were books about the history of the traveling carnival and of the circus. There were books about child
I said it
development, about
in reverse,
myths
but
and
same thing.
legends, about sewing patterns and techniques. There were volumes that claimed to be about trickster gods, about quilting bees, and about football cheering squads and their mascots. Most of these make a lot of sense. Things like anatomy, mascots, sewing patterns, it all ties into the idea that he was creating characters and turning costumes into animatronics. The books about child development either tie into the fact that he was catering to kids and so was trying to figure out how he could best serve his customers, or it's linked to the human anatomy books and ties into Henry creating robot versions of his daughter Charlie. But there's one selection that has always stood out as odd, one that I've never had an explanation for, and that is the history of the traveling carnival and of the circus. Why would Henry need books on that topic if all the work he's ever done is on animatronics and diners? He needs it because the origins of Fazbear are rooted in traveling circuses and carnivals. It was a hint as to the
See, he
first
said it in
years
reverse
of
too.
this business. So, this circus, Full Fest, seems to be where Fazbear Entertainment all began. But now
Yes.
the question is, who else was there? And I don't mean human characters, let's be honest, we don't have many of them that are actually
I wonder if he's gonna go over, like,
especially
Sun and
back in
Moon.
1970. I mean, which of the Fazbear characters were part of the original roster? As I've mentioned, during Help Wanted 2, we get a number of minigames that take place in carnival-like settings, namely Fazablast and the Carousel. And it's the Carousel that I want us to take a look at first. The game itself is pretty straightforward. You know, when you don't have an Ash trying to desperately keep your microphone attached.
That was funny.
But despite this, Matt did manage to notice a very interesting detail in the level's design. A random pumpkin, just sitting there waiting to be thrown. I think we can all agree that pumpkins are something we specifically associate with Halloween. And the only event
Yes,
we know to
and the
take
Fall
place
Fest.
at Halloween in this franchise is, you guessed it, Fall Fest. We even get a Halloween-themed version of Moon appear
Yes.
during the nightmare level of the Carousel ride. The Carousel is from Fall Fest, which means it's from the early part of the franchise. But then
Or at the very least, it's based on that. But one thing I do want to, or it's meant to like allude to that. One thing I do want to mention though is the characters that are there. Some people have suggested that maybe Sun and Moon were there, the daycare attendant, because there's the whole thing where they are associated with the comedy and tragedy masks, and they're mentioned in the books to have originated at a stage show, and then were taken by Fazbear Entertainment and then messed with and turned into the daycare attendant that we know now, like equipped with Fazbear technology and stuff like that. So some people have suggested that the stage show that they were from was at Fall Fest. The one thing about that, though, is that would make them really, really old, and they could be old, but they don't really seem that old. And the fact that Fazbear Entertainment took them and equipped them with Fazbear technology kind of indicates that they weren't originally owned by Fazbear. And you could say that Fazbear wasn't, like, created by that point, but Fazbear was created because of that, if anything. So I feel like they would still have those characters and they wouldn't have had to take them, but that's, like, they could have. So it's definitely possible. I just find that a little strange, but it's entirely, like, possible. Another thing is Freddy as a character. So Fredbear and Freddy are... Fredbear is stated in some areas, like the Fredbear Singing Show, to be... Fredbear is named Freddy. Fredbear and Freddy are the same character, and in the older Fredbear's Family Diner posters, like the ones with the just the animal mascots that we see, and the fact that like with the I'm blanking for some reason, but in those old posters from Security Breach, Fredbear is shown with the design of Freddy. And there's also the fact that Glitchtrap is there, or like a suit, a costume version of Glitchtrap, which is probably where Glitchtrap got the appearance from. So that indicates that this Fredbear's poster is from earlier on in Fredbear's history, before they got the Springlock suits, which indicates that Fredbear and Freddy were originally the same character. And then later on, when they turned the suits into animatronics, Fredbear and Freddy like kind of diverted and became two separate characters, even though they were originally the same character. And then that's when Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. That's another thing that I mentioned in my Fall Fest and my Fredbear's videos, because I think that makes a lot of sense. And that also ties into like what characters were there. I think that Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy were probably also there too. But Freddy was originally Fredbear, and Spring Bonnie was there as well. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to mention.
Then take a look at the characters that are used on the carousel. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, which, you know, is what you'd expect. Except it's not just the original versions from FNAF 1. The one that immediately stands out to me is this white and black version of Foxy.
That one is interesting to note.
Well, kinda. Because you might also notice it has a hook.
It has a hook.
Something that Funtime Foxy
it's like Mangle. Mangle is actually also named Funtime Foxy, but she's not the same Funtime Foxy as the one from Sister Location. We know that from FNAF World and the like FNAF merch, where the fixed version of Mangle is not named Toy Foxy, it's named Funtime Foxy, which is a really random detail. I don't know why that's the case.
Sister Location. However, there is a version of Funtime Foxy with a hook hand, and that's in FNAF World, a game that came out before Sister Location and doesn't have any other Funtime animatronics present, implying that Funtime Foxy didn't originally belong with that group of animatronics, instead belonging to an earlier set, and this carousel tells us exactly which group that is. The other characters on this ride, besides Funtime Foxy and the original 4, all have rosy red cheeks, which aligns with the toy animatronics from FNAF 2. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Funtime Foxy. The toy version of Foxy.
I think that also, I'm going to rewind a little bit so I can hear that a little bit better again, because I was kind of thinking about the Into the Pit game, where there's actually an image on the wall of Toy Bonnie, despite the fact that this is at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the first one, before the toy animatronics were created. So I feel like that indicates that the toy animatronics, not as animatronics, but as characters, also existed before they were actually created as animatronics in 1987, which also ties into the Mangle toy on the floor of Elizabeth's bedroom. Like, why would that be there? Well, it's not actually a Mangle toy, it's just a Funtime Foxy toy that was broken.
Red cheeks, which aligns with the toy animatronics from FNAF 2. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Funtime Foxy. The toy version of Foxy. The toy animatronics being here feels wrong, doesn't it? The toys don't become a thing until 1987 with their special recognition software and new, more complex endoskeletons. They replaced the old withered versions of the original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy from the original Freddys. How then are they on a ride from 1970? Well, this is because I don't think the toy animatronics are meant to call back to the 1983 Freddy's animatronics. They're supposed to be referencing the original Circus costumes. Going back to the Mimic story, once Edwin abandons the warehouse, Fazbear employees are sent in to collect any Fazbear property. Things like their costumes. One character mentions a few of them: a brown Freddy Fazbear costume, a yellow Chica costume, a Foxy costume, a Bonnie costume. The original 4 were all in existence as costumes before their introduction as animatronics at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And what's even crazier is the designs of those costumes actually exist. A few years ago there was a, let's just say controversial, but at the time official FNAF artist that dropped an image onto the FNAF subreddit with zero context or explanation. The only thing we knew is that these images contained Scott's official copyright. These images were commissioned
I could see the silhouettes
Scott,
of them when he showed them.
As good a piece of evidence
showed it a little bit earlier.
What are these images of? Versions of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica in a similar style to the mascot costumes you'd find at a theme park like Disneyland, all with large proportions and big round heads in order to have a human fit inside.
And with designs more similar to the toy animatronics.
The original costumes for the characters. And where were these costumes used? I suspect they were worn at the circus. Why? Well, notice the bright red cheeks. Exaggerated features like big red noses or cheeks have been used by clowns.
I would say that the original ones as those designs did exist at the circus, but I think the original designs also existed as well. because they were turned into the animatronics that like we know as like Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. So I feel like there's different versions of each animatronic.
Clowns and circus performers for centuries.
Pennywise.
Joseph Grimaldi is recognized as being the ancestor for modern clowns, and in 1802 he created the design for his most iconic character, Joey the Clown. And one of this character's iconic features was painted red cheeks. Similarly, Albert Fratellini is known to have helped redefine a type of clown in the mid-1900s known as the August Clown, complete with the bright red nose we know today. Why did both these performers feel it necessary to have bright red features for the evolution of the clown? Because when the word clown was first recorded in 1560, it meant rustic, poor, or peasant. This often boiled down to one simple stereotype: the town drunk, who you would often see after he'd had a bit too much to drink, with a bright red nose and red cheeks. This happens when your body isn't able to digest alcohol properly, causing a release of histamines that essentially cause your face to have an allergic reaction, namely red cheeks and nose. The idea of referencing this was to make clowns or characters immediately look foolish, silly, or disarming, so people would be quicker to laugh at them rather than be scared of them, which is pretty ironic. When
I feel like this is going to turn into one of those out of context videos.
Not because they're trying to make
one of those game theory out of context videos.
Very child friendly.
I feel like this is going to turn into one of those.
Same reactions of silly, goofy fun. And the kicker is you can see this trait carried over into the most definitively circus costume we've got available. Elephant costume down in the ruined basement. Usually you don't get a chance to see them up close, but freeze the frame just right, or, you know, search the game files, and you'll find that although a little faded, it too has rosy red cheeks. So red-cheeked characters, like the ones we see in these designs, would have been right at home at a circus, which also opens up the door to other red-cheeked characters from this franchise to potentially be part of the original roster. Maybe characters that weren't originally animal costumes, but more likely humans wearing the same kind of face paint. Case in point, Balloon Boy.
Hello?
Balloon Boy has never really fit in anywhere. We turned on FNAF 2 and he was just there, and we've hated him ever since.
I said read the
But in Security Breach, he got his own arcade.
Yes, I was about to bring that up.
If you played that game,
I was about to pause the video and bring that up, and now I'm pausing the video to bring this up after he brought it up. There is the Balloon Boy, like, arcade machine with obviously the circus in the background, which ties Balloon Boy with that thing. I didn't talk much about Balloon Boy in my videos on this topic, but I did mention Balloon World in general.
You'd see a circus tent in the
At least
background.
I think I did.
Balloon Boy's only standalone adventure places him at the circus. But while he never fit in with FNAF 2's characters, he did have a striking resemblance to a handful of characters in Sister Location and Circus Babies. Other wooden puppets like the Magician and Fortune Teller, all jobs that would be found at a circus. Selling balloons was an important part of any circus. So
Little Joe looks like exactly like Balloon Boy.
Them to children
Don't forget about him.
Right at home with the rest of them. And to top it all off, when Funko decided to release their new circus line of FNAF products, it contained not just clown versions of all the characters,
balloon versions.
but versions of all of them wearing Balloon Boy's iconic outfit. We were being shown that balloon characters, and specifically that outfit, are inherently tied to the circus. Balloon Boy has to be a part of this. Fall Fest is where he finally makes sense. Another example would be Circus Baby. She's been showing up a lot in recent games, just like the circus imagery, so it feels like Steel Wool are purposely trying to connect the two. She's also got the red cheeks we've talked about, as well as that white face paint that we see on most traditional clowns. She'd fit right in at a circus. Plus, you know, she's literally got circus in her name.
I don't know for sure if it would really make sense for a Circus Baby as a character to exist at the carnival or the circus. She could, but I'm not really sure how it would work. It could. Maybe like she as the animatronic was just based on this version. I'm not 100% sure about that though, because I feel like it could just be that the Circus Baby like plushies are meant to tell us that the circus in general is important, rather than tell us that Circus Baby was at it. It could be though. She could be. I'm not 100% sure about that though.
Maybe this character, whose placement in the time out, as well as that white face paint that we see on most traditional clowns, she'd fit right in at a circus. Plus, you know, she's literally got circus in her name. Maybe this character, whose placement in the timeline has perplexed us for so long, belongs way earlier in the franchise's history than any of us expected. But above those two,
as the animatronic though, that doesn't make sense. So.
That gets called out.
As a character though, maybe.
Always one more, a jester costume. Now, I'm sure Matt is once again freaking out because jesters aren't clowns and they aren't part of a circus. And dude, I get it, but just trust me on this. In that quote from the Mimic story about the rack of costumes, after listing off the main 4 characters we know and love,
I agree with Matt though. They're definitely not clowns, but they could fit in at the circus though.
they finish off by adding and bright pink, yellow, green court jester costumes, similar to the colors we see Sun wearing in Security Breach. Yeah,
Not really.
I know, they're a little off, but they're pretty close. And just look at the rest of his costume.
Yeah.
Curly pointed toes with bells, puffy trousers, or pants I suppose, and the tutu-like frills on his waist and ankles. He is 100% meant to be a court jester. He even jumps out of a
Yeah, he's definitely a
castle
jester.
when we first
And he's
meet him in
described as a
Security
jester in the
Breach. And
books
as Matt was
sometimes,
very
too.
keen to point out, jesters originated as performers for royalty in their castles during the Middle Ages. Finally, there's the epilogues, where the jester character once again returns, but this time we get a description of its mask. Quote, Lucia stepped up to the costume, suppressing a shiver at the jester's leering, toothy grin and its wide eyes. One of Sun's most distinct features is his obnoxious, toothy grin. It's so iconic that he had to have teeth underneath his teeth just in case, and those large vacant eyes definitely give off that leering vibe that Lucia was describing. So, even though Sun doesn't have the red cheeks like we talked about, he still appears to be very obvious.
Technically, he could have had the cheeks, because he has, like, the actual bulging cheeks. They could have just been, like, painted over. I'm not 100% sure that Sun, like I said earlier, I don't know if Sun would have been at the circus, but he could have been. And I'm not sure that the jester in the books would have been the, like, the actual daycare attendant, but, like, as a character, it could have been. It's definitely not, like, the actual animatronic, because it's a costume, but I'm not sure if it would be, like, the same character. It could have been, though.
The original crew, Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie, as well as the circus. He is the last one.
What did he say?
with the red cheeks, like we talked about. He still appears to be very obviously connected to the original crew,
Okay.
Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and Bonnie, as well as the circus. He is the last one mentioned when they're all being listed off, as if the costumes were grouped together, like they came from the same collection of characters. Characters that
Yep,
came from
they could.
Fazbear's circus days. Sun and Moon actually make a lot of sense as characters in a traveling circus. In the tale story Bobby Dots, we get a bit of much needed backstory on this character.
Wrong
who
book,
just
but yeah.
showed up in Security Breach, not matching any of the 80s-tastic designs of the Pizzaplex. It turns out they weren't always a daycare attendant, but instead a performer. They put on shows where Sun would be the hero, and when the lights went out, Moon would appear as the story's villain. That ties into the comedy and tragedy masks that we found
Yeah,
in Ruin,
exactly.
masks that display Sun and Moon's face. So it would have also been an ideal performance to keep kids entertained at a circus venue. And later on, when the daycare was introduced, that same Bobby Dot story describes the daycare's design as a carnival-like
You got the right book
space,
this time.
hammering home the connection to the character's origins. And then the icing on the cake, during Hell Wanted 2, he is the one we face when we're trying to fix the carousel from those old
Yeah.
Fall Fest days. He's been there since the start. And when you think about it, in the early days
He
of the
very well
franchise,
could
when
have,
you're
yeah.
trying to keep costs down, buying
Hey, look, there's a
full
carousel,
mascot
too.
costume or fursuit from a trusted provider can cost upwards of $5,000, while costumes for professional jesters and clowns are typically just a few $100, keeping costs nice and low when you're first starting out. It really feels like the circus origin is helping characters that are out of place have a place to finally belong. Sun and Moon, Baby, Balloon Boy, all of them will be right at home here at the circus.
Yeah.
However, Fall Fest isn't just the origins
It
of the
definitely does,
Fazbear franchise. It's also the
put a lot of
origins
things together.
of William Afton's first major tragedy. Fazablast in Help Wanted 2 is a shooting gallery that matches the design of the hub world during the Curse of Dreadbear DLC. Dreadbear even makes an appearance at the attraction. So, this attraction clearly takes place during Fall Fest 1983. However, the penultimate Fazablast level ends with you shooting a number of rockets and popping all the balloon versions of the animatronics that appear. Doing so seems to cause a chain reaction that leads to the whole thing ending up in flames. And when you go back for
Yep.
the final level, the place is burnt to the ground. We see the same thing happen during the carousel ride. As you try to fix it, sparks fly and the thing lights up, leading to the nightmare version of the level where the whole place is already ablaze. And if you go out of bounds during that carousel level, you can see the red sky, burnt trees, water tower, and windmill that are all present during that final Fazablast level off in the distance. Steel Wolf
And
is
in,
clearly
Curse of
showing
Dreadbear
us that
too.
much like every other establishment in this
I
franchise,
did not know that.
this event, Fall Fest 1983, ended in fire. 1983
Probably, yeah.
sucked for this franchise, but especially for Afton. He loses his kid to a malfunctioning Springlock suit and his other son's negligence. Fredbear's family diner gets shut down, and to top it all off, he loses the thing that started this whole business, the circus. Steel Wool is all about a sympathetic villain.
Hold on, I gotta rewind just to see what he...
Showing
to
us that much like
hear
every
that
other
again.
establishment in this franchise, this event, Fall Fest 1983, ended in fire. 1983 sucked for this franchise, but especially for Afton. He loses his...
I mean, I'm not sure it really has to mean that... I think definitely that the Fall Fest... Well, not definitely, but it probably did end up burning down. But Fall Fest 83 doesn't necessarily have to mean that the Fall Fest itself, as like the circus, had to have burned down too. Because in FNAF 6, there's also the Spook Fest, which is very similar to the Fall Fest. I mean, both are a fest that happened towards the fall, so it makes sense if they're like kind of the same thing, but like little different versions of the same thing, just like renamed, I guess. And the Fall Fest 83 could have just been something else, right? It could have just been, it could be telling us when the bite victim died. It could be telling us when Charlotte died, maybe, possibly. We don't know. So technically speaking, we don't know that the Fall Fest would have burned down in 1983. That doesn't mean it didn't, but it doesn't have to have.
Kid to
Basically.
a malfunctioning Springlock suit and his other son's negligence. Fredbear's family diner gets shut down, and to top it all off, he loses the thing that started this whole business, the circus. Steel Wool is all about a sympathetic villain backstory.
Try not to set out to make a cool-looking villain. Go make a monster that have a reason for it. These aren't just like these supernatural forces that came out of nowhere to just hurt people and punish people, right? Like, there were results of other wrongdoing.
Adding a fire to an already pretty awful list of tragedy and loss, it would make it a little less surprising that Afton could suddenly snap and go on a murder.
I don't really
But
think
this
Afton.
fire tells us more than just
I don't really think that Afton went crazy because he was upset about losing stuff, especially not his son, because I think he was definitely crazy before that, given the experiment rooms that we know about, which probably happened before the bite victim even died, considering the bite victim probably was part of them. At least I think he was. So I don't think that William went crazy because of his son dying or because of any of this stuff happening. I do think that this stuff obviously happened and it could have like fueled his anger or whatever, but I don't think that's why he started killing. And I also think that he probably started killing before the bite victim died anyway.
out this first chapter in FNAF.
'Cause personally, I think Charlotte
it also
died
tells us
first.
that there was one other character here, someone else present from the beginning that you wouldn't suspect, the Mimic. Yeah,
Eh.
I know, I was surprised too, but everything seems to be pointing to this guy being here since the early.
I could definitely see that being the case, but I feel like the books more so imply that he was created during the 80s, since he, like, the 70s were referenced in the book, in the story, so it could have taken place also in the 70s, but it feels a little bit weird because the Mimic was created when the costumes were being turned into animatronics, which indicates that it was around when Freddy's was actually about to exist, or when, I mean, it could be when Fredbear's was created, but I don't think the animatronics would have existed then. I think the costumes would still, and I think that the Freddy's characters would have been turned into the Freddy's animatronics when Freddy's itself was actually opening. So, when more Freddy's locations started opening, I feel like the Mimic and, like, the story could have happened, like, around then, like, around 1983 or 1984, which is when I think it probably was, when more Freddy's locations were opening, and so Edwin was helping to make more of the animatronics.
A lot of
It could have been in the 70s, and timeline-wise, it would make sense a little bit with, like, what the story says, but timeline-wise, the story is a little questionable in general. Like, it's a little bit inconsistent with itself, which is a little weird. So at least I've heard that it is, and based on like what I've seen, it seems to be. But I plan to make a whole video like about that in the future, so I guess we'll go over that then. But
different
yeah.
descriptions for the Mimic during the epilogues of
I'm not
Tales
100%
of
sure.
Complex. Sometimes it's a traditional endoskeleton, other times it's a spider-like mess of slimy black wires. But when we are first introduced to it, we're given one
No, it's
extra
not.
detail. A detail that I never fully understood. Quote, it wasn't just a basic metal structure. Its steel frame was contained within a building collection of metal rods and curved plates and an impressive system of ball joints and pistons. All of it was topped with a long, vaguely rectangular-shaped shiny steel skull. The skull was the only part that was shiny. The rest was dark and discolored, as if it had survived some kind of fire. That's a pretty specific way of phrasing it, especially when it points out that the head isn't blackened by the same issue. We're being given a clue as to where this Mimic came from, because the other detail that's important to bear in mind is that quote comes from the very start of the story, when the endoskeleton first arrives at the Pizzaplex. It was delivered to this location.
The fire thing is definitely,
which tells us
the fire thing is definitely worth noting, but it being the circus fire is possible, especially since the Mimic is associated with those costumes which originated at the circus. but it's still weird for like his creation to be that early, but it could have been.
Had to be in a previous Fazbear fire, and I believe that fire was the fire of Fullfest. But what makes me so sure that the Mimic got all burned during that fire specifically? Here's the thing. I know we always joke that everything in this franchise ends in fire, but we can actually count the number of fires on one hand, even if you're an animatronic with only 4 fingers, which means it shouldn't be too difficult to go through each one and determine which one the Mimic came from. Working backwards, there's a fire at the end of Security Breach if you beat the Burn Trap ending. Afton is defeated, the Blob steals him away, and the entire pizza
Or the
place
actual
catches
fire
fire
ending.
and collapses. But as we've talked about before, it doesn't seem like this is the canon ending for Security Breach. We find Gregory's drawings for the non-canon endings during Ruin, and the last one we collect is his drawing of the Burn Trap ending, which means
Also,
this
that takes place
fire
after
wasn't
the Tales
a real
epilogues
fire.
anyway,
And even if
so.
it was, this ending takes place at the Pizzaplex, so the Mimic couldn't have been delivered to the Pizzaplex burnt from a fire, as the Burn Trap ending comes later in the timeline. Second
Yeah.
option is the FNAF 6 fire, but once again we face issues with timeline. The Pizzaplex is being built on top of the FNAF 6 location, which means the Mimic wouldn't be able to be delivered to that location when the Pizzaplex is being constructed, like we see in the book, because it would have already been there. The only other fire left other than Fullfest is the FNAF 3 fire, but the owners of Fazbear Fright seemed pretty stoked when they found their first working animatronic, Springtrap. Up until this point, they'd only had bits and pieces like a foxy head. So it feels like they'd have also made a pretty big deal of finding a Mimic, bringing it back to the location, even if they thought it was just an endo. So it doesn't feel like it can be that one either, which leaves only one fire for the Mimic to have been burnt in, the fire of Fullfest 1983, meaning the Mimic has been around for a long time. We actually theorized
It definitely could have been that. I would say that it could be a different fire that we like haven't seen before, but also we haven't seen the Fall Fest fire either. Like I've said, it definitely could be that fire. I'm just a little question. I just question a little bit if the Mimic would have been created early enough for that to be the case. But like I said, it could have been, depending on how the timeline all goes.
Soon after the events of Ruin, we connected the Mimics thrown together, thin, simple animatronic design to that of Sun and Moon. Namely,
As I said, I plan
very
to do
weird
another
but
video on that in the
distinct
future.
Independently moving teeth. It's a strange design detail that we've never seen before. So for both characters to have the same detail in the same game makes it seem like they
I just gotta say, I find it cool that I notice these things like really. I noticed stuff like this. Like I noticed the teeth being similar with the Mimic and the daycare attendant, and I also noticed like the whole thing with the Fall Fest and the costumes being turned into animatronics. That was a theory I came up with in like when August or something like that. I think it was August, and the fact that it was around then, and the fact that now those theories. Those details are being mentioned. Those details and theories are being mentioned in game theories are cool because I feel like I'm like, damn, I got it first. You know what I mean? Still, it's just cool to me that like I'm not the only one that noticed these things.
have to be connected in some way. And if Sun and Moon come from the early Full Fest origins of the franchise, then
And I'm
the
glad
Mimic
that these
being around
theories
at the
that
same
I
time would explain that connection.
am
But
proud
there's
of
one
are getting more
detail
recognition
that
now
tells
because
me
of
that
this.
The Mimic has to have been around during the Full Fest era of FNAF, something that's been right
If the
under
daycare
our
attendant was,
noses
yeah.
for years. For a while now, we've believed that the glitch trap virus in Help Wanted 1, the virus that takes the shape of a yellow bunny rabbit and takes over Vanessa's mind, isn't actually William Afton himself, but instead a version of the Mimic program that is mimicking Afton's behavior.
Yes.
In the game, we heard about Fazbear trying to keep costs down for this new game they're developing.
I mean, they sent us that stuff in the first place with no explanation.
Exactly.
Told us to scan it. Said it would expedite the process so we wouldn't need to program any pathfinding ourselves. It was a budget thing, I guess.
One thing that's definitely worth noting is like how the Mimic started mimicking Afton. Some people say that like the actual animatronic witnessed stuff that happened in the past, which technically is possible. That's something I used to say, but nowadays I'm not so sure about it. I feel like it makes more sense because why would he mimic Afton using that costume that Afton didn't even use to kill the kids, right? But it makes a lot of sense when you consider the fact that Pizza Party wasn't altered by Glitch Trap. It was already like that, which is evident by the fact that that's just the ending of the game, meaning that that is an actual level. That Glitch Trap, like that yellow rabbit, that yellow Bonnie character was in that ending, and you were kidnapped by him, just like what Afton did. Meaning the Mimic being used to create that incident in the game was now witnessing Afton do it in order to know how to create it himself. So, through that would be how he started mimicking Afton, by watching Afton do that in the game, or by watching Afton do that, like, by watching the information about that, by having that information programmed into its head, and then it then mimicking that to create the game, and so from that it continued to mimic Afton after that, basically.
It was just
I don't know why I explained that a little
things
bit
like that.
confusing,
Looked
in a
pretty
confusing
That
way,
game
but
was
hopefully you
Help
guys get
Wanted.
get what I
It's
mean.
an in-universe game that takes the original FNAF games and turns them into new VR experiences, which is exactly what we learn happened to the Mimic program in The Storyteller. Quote, "It's a simple template-style software that takes previously created stories and rearranges them into new scenarios for VR, AR, and arcade games. That is what Glitchtrap is. The Mimic program, having been scanned into the system, gets a crash course in Afton's murdery tendencies, and
Yes.
is now mimicking it. Hence, he appears as Afton's iconic yellow rabbit. Except there's one part of this
Not really,
explanation
but
that
yes.
never sat right with me. If the Glitchtrap Mimic was learning about Afton from the in-universe games of FNAF 1 to 6, then why does he take this form? Afton in all of those games, even in the 8-bit minigames, is always wearing his Springlock suit, because that was the costume he wore at Fredbear's Family Diner. But the version of the suit the Mimic shows us as Glitchtrap is a completely different design, and at the time, we'd never seen this version before. This isn't his Springlock suit. It's a hand-sewn suit with plastic-looking facial features similar to the ones we saw on that concept art. Those suits came from Full Fest, and so it would make sense for this hand-sewn golden rabbit suit to have also come from the same time period. But for the Mimic to have been able to copy this design, it would have to have some memory of this version of Afton in its memory banks prior to being uploaded to the Help Wanted game system. It would have to have observed Afton perform in this iconic golden rabbit costume alongside a golden singing bear at Full Fest.
I could see that being the case, but as I just said, Pizza Party was the original ending to the game. It wasn't altered by the Mimic. The Mimic just adapted to that, meaning that Glitchtrap like design was probably already in the game, and the Mimic just took that form because he was trying to mimic it.
The Mimic
But
would
maybe
have to be
it
around
could be
during the
like maybe that design wasn't actually already in the game, and the Mimic created it based on its own memory. But that doesn't make as much sense to me. But it could be.
early costume
Like, I get it.
franchise.
I get
Tatewell
that
did
point,
say
for sure.
the circuit boards looked pretty old after all.
It was just junk. Circuit boards and things like that. Look pretty old.
Maybe the Mimic was originally meant to mimic Afton specifically. I'm not entirely sure of this, to be honest, but it does feel like this is where the clues might be headed. Both Full Fest and the
Alright.
diner were open until 1983 after all, so they coexisted for at least 4 years, with the diner opening in 1979. And we know that Afton was performing as Spring Bonnie at the diner, so it's possible that the Mimic was part of Afton's plan to expand the business. He could literally be in 2 places at once. Eventually, the Mimic would be locked underground, with some circuit boards containing its programming set aside just in case. And when the Mimic software was finally used again to help speed up the process of a new VR game, it was shown all of those old FNAF games. And while it watched and learned, it recognized someone, William Afton, the golden rabbit from the circus, and so decided to take on the form it remembered from all those years ago, creating the monster we have spent the last 3 games and 2 DLCs trying to stop. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching.
Alright, that was a good theory. It's cool hearing Tom say that. But I'm going to switch over to my camera. I think that this was a pretty good theory. I agree for the most part. There's a few things that... There's a few like smaller details within these details that I slightly disagree with. Like I just said, I don't think that the Mimic got Afton... Like, started mimicking Afton because of it seeing the games, but rather the game that it was trying to create with the VR game. Which might sound like the same thing, but it's not really. Like, it's similar, but it's not the same. So, like, it's just a few smaller details within the actual bigger ideas that I'm slightly disagreeing with, but I agree for the most part. Overall, I like this theory. I think it's a good theory. There's just some small things that I disagree with. But overall, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to. And let me know what you guys think of this game theory. But I will see you all in the next video. Bye, guys!